Father, we thank you for this day, for opportunity that we have just to be called your children, your servants, and just to know you as our God, our Creator, our Father, our Savior, our Shepherd, our Counselor, the lover of our souls. We just thank you so much for all you do, prepare, continue to instill in us, and just equip us, bringing us through times of valleys and mountaintop experiences, and all of the more equipping us along the way, the things that we don't know at the time we need, but that you know is exactly what we need to continue on, to be strengthened, to be growing in the inner man, to have our spirit to be made ready for the time you come and call us to your own. So we thank you now if we look back and reflections of what you've done in all this time of the Scripture to your people in the Old Testament, as those of covenant to now those in Testament, you've continuously grown in the process of the teachable opportunities you have given through the events and times and places and peoples. Everything is exact for you. And we ask now you give us insight and understanding into your word to see what you're doing and what you've already done and are going to do in the people of Elijah and Elisha and what they speak to and how they speak to us and the events that are soon coming to us on this earth. And we thank you so much, Father, for all you did continue to do, again, in loving us, equipping us, being with the emotional loss of loved ones that we deal with, from Lainey to Vicky to ourselves, and to the pains and opportunities of physical issues with Todd and Lainey as well, and ourselves and Vicky and all of us, and Greg, Sandy, Sheila, Tracy, Nancy, all of us, just have all these things that we deal with. But we know that through it all, in it all, and just after it's all, and you use it all, just to help us to be, again, just better children, better understanding of who you are and what your word says. So be with us now, Father, as we continue to take all the things you've given in our lives practically, as well as what you've given in our lives spiritually, to be put together, to just understand, to be formed and fashioned into your image as we see more of you in your word. Be our counselor, our shepherd, our pastor, our guide, our counselor. In this time, we ask all this in Jesus, Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. Well, I want to start with one snippet that we're going to go into, segue into Elijah and Elisha. Two snippets. One is Pam wrote on and you know this already, on your Q&A question. She said, I wonder if we can do Elijah and Elisha if Spirit leads you. Well, guess what? He did. Yes?
Tracy.
Hi, Tracy. So I was just enthralled. I just was thinking about that, and all of a sudden, I already thought about it because of your question, even before I got to that part of your statement in this email. And I thought, that's interesting. And sure enough, that's where I'm glad to be here. And this is probably going to be a couple weeks, by the way. It's not going to be, one or two. Maybe it's going to be a couple weeks because we're going to go through the entire story of these guys. However, before I get involved in that, that's one snippet. I want to make sure you knew the genesis of this study is because how Lord Spirit led Pam to say that, and then so I'm just now taking off from that, how it gripped me as well, the overview from the Q&A to now to where we are now. And we're going to see much more. I've seen things that I never even saw before already, and I'm going to share some of that with you. So that today's going to be the overview piece of that. But in light of that also, I wanted to bring out one point in the New Testament. People don't realize this, that Elijah is mentioned quite a bit, obviously, because of John the Baptist and Jesus, Yeshua. They're being accused or thought of as being, are you Elijah? They said John the Baptist. Or to Jesus, Yeshua, are you Elijah? We think you're him. And so when you have that sense of what people think about John the Baptist and Yeshua being Elijah, people always know that. But then there's on the cross. They say, well, he's saying, my God, let Elijah take him down. Let Elijah save him, they said, right? But there is a point in Luke where he brings out an actual reference to the actions of Elijah and Elisha. In Luke chapter 4, he's the only gospel writer to mention Elisha. So Elijah is mentioned by all the gospel writers, but Elisha is only mentioned once in the entire New Testament, and that is by Luke. But it's in the context, and not confuse anybody, that he's not mistaken. It's clearly Elisha he's talking about, but right after he spoke about Elijah. So he speaks of both of them right together. So I want to start with this and also then segue a little bit into something I want to take a gleaning from what Lainey mentioned about this. We say leprosy, but it's actually a bacterial disease. I don't want to use that term leprosy because it brings up a connotation of today's medical term, but actually we found it's a bacterial underneath that speaks to a spiritual disposition underneath our mind and heart, our spirit being against God and harboring things that eventually outwardly God's showing that all of us have a disposition we got to deal with. And if we don't, it's going to, at a matter of time, outwardly manifest. That was the symbolic representation of why what they called leprosy, which is a bacterial mold, fungus, mildew issue. We saw that, but we're going to look in Luke chapter 4, and he says some things about Elijah and Elisha, and he says this in verse 25 through 27 of Luke 4. He says, but in truth I say to you, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was closed 3 years, when the heavens were closed 3 years. And he says, in 6 months. And so that there came a great famine over all the land. And yet no one of them was Elijah sent, but to a widow woman at Sarepta of Sidon. And there were many lepers in Israel. Again, the bacterial disease I mentioned to you, again, represents that all of us have a disposition from which leads to an outward manifestation, if we don't deal with it, of our spiritual disposition being wrong. In the days of Elisha, the prophet, and yet no one of them was cleansed but Naaman the Syrian. Yes?
When he said, I often think how HIV is similar to it.
Well, so when you think about what I just read there, he's talking about, and I understand about HIV, is a representation of an outward manifestation of an actual, that's different. That's an outward manifestation of an action that has been taken by people that should not be taken. This is more of a disposition that's being harbored underneath. The difference in this is it's a darkness from within that manifests itself from without, because bacteria, mold, mildew thrives in dark places. And so, interesting enough, I wanted to say just a little bit of a snippet from the Q&A. I didn't highlight this as much, but I want to kind of make sure you understand this. I find it not just ironic, but think about in the tribulation period, what's going to happen, tribulation. The Antichrist comes to deceive. And then the beast comes all out and just becomes overtly evil. But it's clear that tribulation's about deception. It starts off with deception, delusion, lies. And so the inner dispositions of people are exposed. One would definitely agree with that, no matter what your belief is about the tribulation period, as long as you believe it exists, which some people deny it does, by the way. You know that that's true. There's a deception, delusion, and an exposure of the sinfulness of man, and a dealing with it by God and by the Antichrist who becomes the beast. Interesting, yes?
Just a little quick thing. That name of the Syrian almost sounds like the name of the wife of Ham.
Yeah, Naaman, yeah. The interesting part is when he brings out Elijah and Elisha, he's basically pointing out God's sovereignty. And he does this in lieu of Yeshua saying a prophet's not welcome in his own town. He's bringing out sovereignty as if to say, oh, God wants to save everybody, huh? You mean like he did with Elijah? Oh, you mean like he did with Elisha? He's reminding people, wake up, man. Not everybody is privy to the benefits of the Lord God Almighty. Well, yeah, he wants everybody to know. Then why didn't under Elijah's day or Elisha's day did they not heal all who had widows of a son, all who were lepers, dealing with the bacterial disease? That was Luke's point as a doctor. Hello, he heals who he wants to heal. Not everybody has the opportunity or the chance or the so-called free will. It was God's sovereign hand. Elijah didn't say, who do I go to next, Lord? That's not what happened. People didn't say, oh, Lord, he's helped me. That's not what happened. They were singled out by God to be blessed with new life, new healing. It's a sovereignty of God issue. Yes?
The more I'm reading it, like the Stringfellow says free will, Philip Keller free will.
Yeah, they all do that.
Even Lars Schlesinger free will. I think they're all confusing choice.
They are.
Free will.
They do. Because when they say will and choice, they say that, but it's not just them confusing the verbiage. They actually mean that man is autonomous. Because you start saying man has a will and a choice, they'll be willing to drop the free as long as you're willing to accept from them that we are autonomous to do what we want. God does not dictate our future. Sure he does. Because they think if it's dictated in our future, then the will and choice that we have is not real. And they don't understand that with time and emotions, it is real. And within the fact that we don't see the future, again, it's real. It's not just a free word that they'll maybe acquiesce to if they were alive today, some of the people. But they would still say, well, the will and choice has to therefore allow us to change our future. That's impossible. But that's what they think. So there's two problems there. They say free will in the sense that the word shouldn't be said. They put the word free there, it shouldn't be said. But then if they do want to drop it, they'll go, as long as we understand that will choice means that we can change our future. No, I'm not going to agree with you on that. No. It's not just the freedom issue that's the issue. It's the issue that you have no control over your future. Or your present, for that matter. So don't even try to act like or your past. matter of fact, science even dictates that. Science even dictates that since the past is already been set, it's an indicator of the future, which is already set. And there's a whole entire scientific community that understands that. They're not even Christian, and they understand from scientific just logic. They go, well, if the past is set and it dictates the future, then the future is actually set. And they talk about us being like a mouse going through a cube of cheese. It's already been set. That like time is a cube, and you're just going through it. And so that's what I mentioned myself with time and emotions. It's deceiving that we can either be free or change the future, which we can do neither one. Yes?
Tracy said, is the mic sound bad for anyone else, echoish like used to be? Very hard to listen to, not clear. Lainey said, I had to turn volume down here. And Tracy said, even with volume down, it's the same. And Todd said, maybe lower the mic on her shirt down in the lower left.
How about now? How about now? Is that better? Is that better?
What do you need to hear?
Is that better? Does that sound better? Yes, no, maybe so?
You have to talk more, she said.
I just want to see if it's better or not. If this sound is better sounding because it's lower down on my buttons on my shirt. Did that make a difference in the sound?
Pam said it seems better to me. Todd said yes. And I haven't heard from Tracy. Lainey said it's fine. Marilyn said it sounds great to me.
Okay.
And Tracy said a little.
All right. So I'll move it back here again. Okay. So, all right. So I'll move it down even more. All right. So.
Yeah, Marilyn, Greg, and Sandy are here also.
Okay. Hello, Marilyn, Greg, and Sandy. So what I was going to point out about the leprosy/bacterial disease that we see that Elisha came across of, and then Elijah, and both of them came across a widow that they rose up, their son. The reality is that was a sovereign hand of God. It was a sovereignty of God. Many people lost their children. How come only those two got blessed? Many folks had a bacterial disease. Why was it Naaman that was blessed? And that's what Luke's pointing out in Luke chapter 4, with both of them saying it's a sovereignty of God issue. It's not a man's choice issue. It's that simple. You can't dictate your future. You can't change your future. God dictates your future. God dictates the choice that is made aware to you, period. And he's making that very clear as a physician, meaning as a physician, I can only treat and diagnose. I don't heal. I can't remedy your sin problem. That's what Luke's saying. I can only prolong life. That's all I can do. I can't cure you of your sin problem, or else you would never die. If I could do that, the evidence is you would never die. Well, guess what? We do, so therefore you can. But the point about the issue of the skin disease issue in the Old Testament, we saw from Leviticus 13, I wanted to point this out. The colors that were mentioned is red, of this bacterial/leprosy, green, and white. And also we know that it thrives in darkness, which is black. What do those colors remind you of? Because one thing should come to your mind more than anything else. That's the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen of the tribulation period. The 4 horsemen of the tribulation period is white, red, black, and pale, which is green. So why would the skin disease have those colors? Do you know why? Because it brings out the author of sin, who is manipulating your mind and heart inside of you with your deception to cause you to be a hypocrite and to be a deceiving, delusioned person about who your spiritual walk is. And then God manifested outwardly in some people to show us that's what all of us have a problem with. But if we don't straighten it out, that's going to happen to all of us. So that's what that's about. So I wanted to kind of put as a side note that before we get into Elijah and Elisha. Yes?
Pam said wordless book colors.
Yeah. So when you look at the avenues of Elijah and Elisha, why are we studying this today is because, again, the issue of how do we see it, not from just a historical standpoint of the 2 men and what God did. And I want to see it from the typology standpoint of going into not just in reference to the prophetic aspects of it, but what they mean symbolically to us in the spiritual growth of where they are in the ideas of kingdom placement, of the future days of inheritance and entrance, the tribulation period, all of that. So one thing we have to kind of see here is not one thing, there's a lot of things we have to see. So first off, I put on the board that the stories we're going to read from is from 1 Kings 17 to 2 Kings 13. We're not going to read a whole lot of those today because today is the day of laying the groundwork. And I got to get a lot of groundwork laid in our minds to understand where we're at. So first of all, the kingdom was divided in 930 BC. You said, what kingdom? What are you talking about? Well, again, there's Saul, there's David, there's Solomon, remember? And there's Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And so you have Jeroboam, not a good dude. He goes off to cause Israel to sin, right? Well, 56 years later, but now you have the northern tribes, Israel, 10 tribes went there, and the southern tribes, Judah, southern tribes went there. They existed in that divided state for 56 years before Elijah came on the scene. Elijah, his name means my God is Yah. So Elijah comes on the scene. You say, I don't understand the significance. Why are you bringing this up? Okay. Because between Elijah and Elisha, there is zero time in the entire history of Israel where there's more miracles done than in their day. In their day, there was the most amount of miracles done spanning a period of about 70 years because Elijah's ministry was about 22 years. Elisha, his ministry was around 60-something years. So we don't know exactly when it ended. So you look at that 60, 70 years, there was more miracles done in that time frame than any other time frame of the Old Testament. Well, why is that? Why is that? We're going to talk about that because it speaks to things that are back then, speaking to the future tribulation period, when once again we'll have more signs and wonders than ever seen before in that 7-year period than any other, because there will be. And some won't be good signs and wonders either. But some of it's going to be God himself bringing down all the signs and wonders of opening up the seals and the vials. It's not cool, right? It's a lot of signs and wonders going on in tribulation. So for our signs and wonder charismatic friends who thinks that's a good thing, not exactly. It's actually a sign of a bad about to come. So you better soak that in for a second. It's a sign that God's had enough, and he's putting forth a statement of fact that this is what is the power and character of God, from which you better get your act together. Because good is coming if you're on board, and if not, bad's coming. Either way, a reckoning is coming. When he does signs and wonders, you can look it up. Every time you see that in the Bible, every time you see signs and wonders in the Bible, you'll see that God's power is being made shown, and his character of holiness is being upheld, and a reckoning is coming. Either get on board that freight train or get plowed by it. Just ask Pharaoh. Ask the Egyptians how it felt when they weren't on board with that God train of strength and power through signs and wonders. Moses was the precursor of that, is the first one to have multiple signs and wonders. But no one goes beyond the number of miracles that Elisha did. But before Elisha, you had Elijah. So both of them combined had the most amount of miracles over that 60, 70-year period. So there's that. They were, to keep in your mind, they were the first prophets of the divided kingdom. So they were the first prophets to come on the scene. They were under the Assyrian Empire at the time. They were alive during the time, I should say, which the Assyrian Empire was the empire of the day. Remember, going backwards in time on the image of Daniel, it was the Roman Empire, and before that was the Greek Empire, and before that was the Medes and Persians Empire, and before that was the Babylonian Empire, which is the head of gold. But before the Babylonians came to power, it was the Assyrians. And before the Assyrians, you had Egypt, which is why they come into view from time to time, because they were still on the scene as a powerful country, just never as an empire. They didn't expand out like Assyria did, and then, of course, Babylon and the like ongoing. So Elisha and Elijah predated the image of Daniel's Babylonian head of gold kingdoms that God stated would be on the earth. They predated that. These guys predated the major prophets that you know of, Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. They predated these guys. These guys are heavy hitters that are the beginning. They are the initial people that started the prophetic statements to the people of Israel and Judah. Well, Israel, they're on Israel's side, the northern kingdom. So with that being said, you have, before them, you had Moses as the greatest prophet they'd ever seen. There's no doubt about it. No, the Lord even says so. There's no greater prophet than Moses. But when it comes to miracles, though, Elijah and Elisha were remarkably insane how much they did. Now, some would argue Elijah did 8 miracles, and then Elisha did 16. double, right? But if you count the prophecies, some people count what they did versus what they said. And we're going to look into this as we go through time, but I want to make sure I preface this so you would know there is a distinction. And yes, I'm quite aware if you go online or read different books, some will say Elijah did 8, Elisha did 16. That's double. Oh, no, Elijah did 14. No, Elisha did 28. So they'll have this doubling, right, which is accurate. But what you'll find is that some will count what they did, that God did through them, versus what they said that came to pass. So if you count what they said that came to pass as in prophetic statements, then you would count those as miracles as well, and then you're up to like 14 and 28. Either way you slice the bread, there's a lot of miracles going on that these guys did collectively, okay? So it's just a matter of how we look at that, and we'll see that as we go through the study. But again, I'm just prefacing this at the beginning. So what is the reasons why that this came about? So again, we have them at the beginning of the divided kingdom, 56 years in, and we have, I would say, again, as a precursor. Now, 56 years, what does that speak to? Why 56 years later? I believe why, because 50 plus 6 is 56, and 50 is the year of Jubilee when all debts are set free. 6 is the number of man's inheritance. I don't find it coincidental at all, because Elijah and Elisha typify the Joel prophetic statements that Joel says, and I will read that to you. And Joel, and people are, again, our charismatic friends who think it's really clamoring and fun and awesome to go towards signs and wonders, they don't know what they're saying. It's not even funny. So you go to Joel chapter 2, verse 28 to 32, and it shall come to pass after these things, I will pour out a portion of my spirit on all flesh. And your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions, and on my servants and on my handmaids in those days I will pour out a portion of my spirit. I will exhibit wonders in heaven and on earth, and blood and fire and smoky vapor. The sun be turned to darkness, the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and illustrious day of the Lord. But whoever will call the name of the Lord will be saved. From Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall be the Savior, as the Lord has said, and the publishers of glad tidings, and whom the Lord has called. That particular verse encompasses 3 different events. Actually, 4 events. It starts with it's a symbolism of what happened in Moses' day, as you see some of the things mentioned there about the heavens signs. It's not funny. Was that a fun time? Even the Israelites were like, it's pretty scary. But don't even act like they were going, yay! No. They were not like, they themselves were a little bit intimidated by God's power and might being shown unto Egypt with those plagues. It wasn't fun times, okay? It was when you see tragedy and carnage around you of life just being taken from human and animals, it's pretty insane, okay? And crops and everything, right? So they saw Moses was the beginning of the forerunner of that Joel fulfillment, a partial fulfillment. Elijah and Elisha is another partial fulfillment. Then the days of Christ himself unto the book of Acts is another partial fulfillment. And then all of a sudden, the completed fulfillment. What a coincidence. There's 4. And 4 is a number of the kingdom of God, of heaven and earth. And because there's 2 spheres to each one. There's an entrance and inheritance to each one, hence the 4. So you have earthly entrance and inheritance, heavenly entrance and inheritance. You have 4, and there's 4 number of the kingdom. And here you have 4 references of symbolism that's continuing to build on each other. Starts off with Moses. It builds larger under Elijah and Elisha. It builds larger under Christ and through the apostles, book of Acts. Then it gets to be a demonstrative example in Revelation. So you really want to focus on signs and wonders, do you? It's not funny. When you focus in on that, you're focusing in on God's illustration of symbolic reference to a time of reckoning. You do it like it's a punchline of some kind of fun thing. You can just wave your hands and it's not funny. It's ironic to me that it's almost like talking about World War II as if it's a great thing to put on your uniform and have stars and stripes. Now, that's what happens, but when you do that, bad's about to happen. When you go strap on that helmet and put that gun, that's not funny. People are going to die. Okay, so when you start talking about signs and wonders, death ensues. It just happens. Yes.
When you said call on the name of the Lord and be saved, I wonder the 144,000 that make it to Petra.
Yeah.
They call on the name of the Lord in their trouble, and then eventually they'll be saved at the end of the trip.
The Petra people, you're gonna find there's so much symmetry with Elijah and Elisha about this issue. I'm going to show you this, what you just mentioned about Petra. I'm going to show you. It's going to come up actually, and I'll show it to you. So It's funny you said that. So again, the signs and wonders issue of Elijah and Elisha speak back to the precursor of Moses and Joshua, which speak forward to the times of Christ, which speak even more so to the times of the great ultimate signs and wonders of all time in the heavens and on earth, from God himself bringing down the things in tribulation. All right? So that's the overarching reason why it's 56 years, because God's talking about, well, how does Jubilee speak to debts being set free if Elijah and Elisha are phase 2 of 4 phases that speak to this debt? What debt's being set free? Oh, you know, Daniel's 70th week. They haven't paid their debt yet that they owe God, do they? You see, the debt's got to be paid, and then they're set free. And that's why it's 56 years, because it speaks to the 50, which they have to have their debt paid before they can experience their entrance or possible inheritance that God intended for them all along. And that's why there's a 56-year gap between the kingdom divided and Elijah coming on the scene. I don't find that to be coincidental at all. And what do I base that on? The truth. The kingdom was divided in 930 BC. That's when Jeroboam started to reign. Elijah came on in 874, because that's when Ahab started to reign. It says that right there in 1 Kings 17. That's what's up. I didn't write the book. I'm just telling you what it says. So that's why the 56 years. But again, more background here. More background. More stirring of your spirit. It gets really exciting. And I tell you, I'm trying to talk as slow as I can. I know you're going to go, really? You got to do a better job of that. So I can tell you that it's exciting, to things that you see in this whole aspect of Elijah and Elisha. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not blinking. I thought it was blinking. All right, so the reality is that with Moses and Joshua being a precursor, let's talk about that. When I say precursor, what do I mean? So the overarching aspect, there's 3 symbolisms of this successor, predecessor thing. There's Moses and Joshua. There's Elijah and Elisha. Then, of course, we have John the Baptist and Jesus. But that's not really the same thing, though. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But then there's the overarching issue of God the Father and God the Son. Yes?
Sandy and Greg said, I think I missed something about the year of Jubilee.
Okay, so the year of Jubilee is the year in the Scripture that every 50 years, all debts are set free. So the year of Jubilee is 50 years your debts are set free. So 50 is a reminder. You have 56, 50 plus 6. It reminds you of 6, the number of man's inheritance, and 50 when debts are set free. So those together is not a coincidence that 56 years later Elijah came in, and Elijah and Elisha are a type of the tribulation period. What a coincidence that they come on the scene 56 years later. As the first one comes on the scene, it's the beginning of when the debt's about to be paid in full. Daniel's 70th week, they owe God a debt they have to pay. He told them that. I ain't playing with you. And then, but after that, they have their entrance and inheritance possibility. They get an entrance with a possible inheritance in view, which is where the 50 and 6 comes from. Yes?
And they said, I thought all debts were canceled.
Yeah, correct. All debts, paid. Well, I say paid, I mean yes, because when they're canceled, thank you very much for pointing that out, the distinctive difference. So they're not actually paying them, they're canceled, yes. So I'm bringing out that obviously they can't, it's canceling the debt they owe God. So God's canceling out the debt. You're correct. So paid, canceled, it's not the same exact thing, to your point, but it results in the same net effect, which is your debt is erased, right? So I should have used that terminology, my apology. So the debt's erased, okay? It's erased. The debt, like Jesus did on the cross, to Telestai, he paid our debts, erased. So that's what that's speaking to. So he's going to erase the debt, which again, what does that speak to? Because he's the one that controls when the 70th week comes, not them. They can't say, I want to get it over now. It doesn't work that way. You can't just say, I want to get it over now, which is another issue of life practicality, that when you're going through something bad or you're going to have something happen unto you, don't you have that problem in your mind? I know I do. You want to say, oh, just get it over with. Get this surgery over with. Get this physical ailment over with. Get this emotional traumatic thing over with. Get this financial hardship over with. And the Lord says, in my time, you can't determine that, son, daughter, right? That's what he does. But he's determining when your debt is erased. He determines when your debt is paid. He determines when your debt is canceled, not us. We have a collaborative process in that, but ultimately it's on him. He determines all that. It's pretty awesome how God is like. So God's teaching us, embrace the process, my child. Embrace the process. There's benefits and lessons to be learned as I do what I do and how long I take. It's not because I'm messing with you, messing with your brain and your heart. No, 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 no. I'm loving on you as a shepherd. There's something you got to learn. Pay attention. Everything I do is for a reason. Don't think it's like when the shepherd shaves the wool off the sheep, he's all mad. Then he realizes, oh, that was good. It's afterwards you realize. It's only afterwards. You got to be patient with God. He's doing what's right for us. Yes?
Lady said, I'm guilty of praying that way.
So here's the thing. So again, you have, I am too, Lainey. Trust me, I get you. We've all been there praying that way of God, get it over fast. And yet God's like, no, the valley experience lasts as long as I need for it to last. And you go, well, I need it to be over yesterday. He's like, that's what you're thinking. But I know it's better. Which one do you want? You want my best for you or what you think's best for you? No, I'll go with what you want. I give up. I don't want that. I don't want what's best for me. I want what you want what's best for me. You know? And that's why the so-called happiness people pursue. They say, don't you want me to be happy? No, I want you to be content with the Lord in your life. Because only in that time, in that state, will you find happiness. When you're content with God's will in your life and His love and His peace, then you'll be happy. Until you are, you'll never be happy. It's all just a veneer. It's a joke. It's a lie that you're telling yourself you are when you're really not. Unless you have God's contentment with His will in your life, His love and His peace. When you have that, then nothing can take that happiness, because that's when God calls that a deeper happiness, which is the word blessed. He calls that being blessed beyond measure, once you have joy. And the joy of the Lord no one can take from you. Why? Because you're content on His will, His love, His peace. Who can take that from you? Who? Nobody and nothing can take that from you. And that's what your happiness comes from. And that's what your joy comes from. So when people say to me, don't you want me to be happy? No, I don't. It depends on what, because you mean in human tense in this world. I want you to be content with who the Lord is and the Lord's will in your life, His love and His peace. And then nothing can stay His hand in your life. Nothing can sway you from your walk with your shepherd, your lover of your soul, your master, your father, your creator, your savior, your coming bridegroom. He's the one that holds you in His hands. It's awesome. So anyway, with that being said, so Moses and Joshua were the first precursor that led to Elijah and Elisha, which is why you have this connection later on to John the Baptist and Jesus, but they were wrong in both cases. So there's some similitude of why it speaks to John the Baptist and Yeshua, Jesus, but it's not the same correlation. This is why they always said to John the Baptist, are you Elijah or not? Tell us. They said to Jesus, same thing, are you Elijah or not? Even when they were asking, who is this just Jesus? Even the scribes and the Roman rulers were like, is he Elijah? Come back from the dead? No. So, but you understand why their confusion, but the reality is this. So it starts with the first precursor, Moses. Now I'm going to show you how Moses and Elijah have an interesting, eerily connection. So watch this. Moses. I'm not making this stuff up, right? Moses. His name means drawn from the water. Did not Moses' beginnings have a veiled start to it? You go, what do you mean, veiled? Was he not veiled to the Israelites to who he was? Wasn't he? Yep. Even to himself was he not veiled as to who he was? Yep. Wasn't it such that he was drawn from the river, the Nile River, and then the Pharaoh's daughter rose him up as her own? He was veiled. He was not known. His origins were veiled. Interesting enough, in the book of 1 Kings 17, when Elijah comes on the scene, it's like a bull in a china shop. It's like if you were to have a movie made of it, you see a guy just go, boom, and he walks in and just says, it'll not rain. Where'd you come from, dude? Who are you? Who are your parents? I'm a Tishbite from Gideon. Okay, and your lineage is? We don't know. We don't know. This guy's got like a veiled ancestry. What a coincidence. Just like Moses. They both have a veiled past that people didn't know about. But when they came on the scene, it was a big boom. When they both come to when God uses them, ask Pharaoh what it was like. When he sees this Moses that was in his court, then humbled as a shepherd for 40 years. Think about that, 40 years. He's not the same Pharaoh, different Pharaoh. And he's like, who's this guy? And he comes back with this power and might. When he came on the scene, it was a very humbling time for Pharaoh. Just like when Elijah confronts Ahab, he's like, what is this? And Ahab is married to Jezebel, which, by the way, Jezebel produces an offspring daughter who later on becomes the wife of one of the other kings under Elisha, who then is with, well, I haven't got there yet, but it's one of the last kings that he has, that she's behind the scenes as a puppeteer during all of these kings under Elisha. So Ahab and Jezebel's offspring produces an evil daughter who continues to have bloodshed and her malicious ways being done, from which she's behind the scenes all the way until the last king that Elisha is under of Israel. Interesting, isn't it? So the evil of Ahab and Jezebel lived on even after Elijah was dead, and she was dead, and he was dead. It lived on in their daughter. She is an evil witch, and she's an evil, manipulative, blood-sucking, murderous wench. Guess what she does? She had one of the kings, we'll go into it, Joram, killed 6 of his brothers just to be reign as king. How's that not evil? I'm just saying, that's like blatantly wrong. So, yes.
Pam said the woman riding the beast.
That's right. We're going to get to this in a moment because there's a lot of typology here with this stuff. Let's go back to Moses now, right? So Moses and Elijah. And I got to get this board out here just for a minute. Not on board, B-O-R-E-D. Haha, funny. This map. All right. You see where Mount Nebo is? You see that? It says that they were at Bethel. Elijah and Elisha were here when they crossed the Jordan, and Elijah was taken up somewhere in this region. Well, that's funny. That's where Mount Nebo is. What happened to Mount Nebo? Oh, that's right. That's where Moses saw Joshua take the baton and say, I'm the guy now. You're second chair, brother. Take a seat. And God said, yeah, speaking of which, even though you don't have dim of eyes or lacking of teeth, meaning you're quite healthy being 120, your life belongs to me now. What? Yeah, I mean, your soul, spirit, it comes back to me. What's going on? You're dead. And he buries him, and then no one knows where he's at, right? Which is really weird. So who finished right in the book of Deuteronomy, right? Was it God himself? Was it Joshua? Hey, whatever. The point is, yeah. What a coincidence that Moses, Mount Nebo is right there. And around the same area when they crossed over the Jordan. That means they're somewhere in this region when Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire. They both had their successors take over from them in the same region where they breathed their last breaths on this earth. I find that to be more than interesting.
Yeah, that's the path of the 144,000.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I'm going to get to that too. Yes.
Pam said, and Lainey said she had that thought too. Pam said, if paradise was in the earth, where was Elijah taken up to?
There you go. And I mentioned this. If you I kind of veiled this a little bit in my response on some of the things. I didn't mean to veil it, but I didn't emphasize it, I should say. So Elijah, when he actually was called up into the chariot of fire, his body went to ash. His body did die. People say he didn't die. Yeah, he did, because his body went to ash. His physical body was just, because you can't have that in heaven. That's so. Same with Enoch, by the way. And you say, well, how do you know that? Because the body is flesh and death and sin, and you can't have it dies. They didn't die on this earth. Their body was brought to that. And by the way, you can't. And when you start spreading out the ash of a person's body throughout the entire atmosphere, how are you going to see that? That's like dust at that point.
When dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return.
That's right. God said that. That's why you know that happened. So then what's left of him? His physical body's gone. He has 2 other parts to him, right? Spirit and soul. Where do those 2 go? Well, his spirit and soul, as we know, I believe his spirit was in the heavenlies, but his soul was in the descending piece of paradise. So this is how people say, well, that makes no sense. You're saying he was divided in his body? Like Enoch and Elijah's spirit is in heaven, but their soul is in paradise? Yes. He said, well, that makes no sense.
Well,
It did with Jesus. That's right. He said, I divide spirit and soul and body in Hebrews 4:12, 1 Thessalonians 5:23, may they all be preserved. Jesus said, fear not him who can destroy the body, but the soul in Gehenna. On top of that, he says also in Matthew 24, verses 51 to 55, I believe it is, he can dichotomize spirit and soul. So and he himself on the cross, Father, into your hands, I commit, plural, my spirit unto heaven. His soul went down to Hades. His body stayed in the grave until the whole 3 days was over. Then his body rose up. Then his soul rose up and his spirit reconstituted in his body again. That's amazingly awesome, which is what happened to Elijah. He came back when the Mount of Transfiguration. That was a wow moment there, because Moses' body was reconstituted, and so was Elijah's. But when he rose from the dead, and many spirits came back from the graves, it says in Matthew 27:51, is it? I think it is. Elijah's one of them, I believe. He came walking around, and they were like, oh my gosh. And by the way, you're going to see later on in our study, they knew who he was, because there was an image of him that he had this coat on with a belt that said leather belt, long hair, camel's hair thing, camel's hair, a belt, and hair. Elisha was bald, and they made fun of him, by the way, and the kids got killed. It's kind of sad, but yet funny, because they think it's kind of funny to poke at God's people. And Elijah just said, okay, and 2 bears came out and then mauled 42 kids. And they were like, That wasn't too funny, was it? So don't do that.
Now, the mode
So-
of dress of the people that were raised from the dead would be different from those in Christ's day.
Yeah, yeah, you would, the mode of dress would be different, but they would not be the same. Yes?
Todd said, I thought you mentioned we shouldn't be cremated. If Elijah's body turned to ash, that would mean he was cremated.
Aha.
And he said, same with the waves of people living, since they won't be able to go into heaven with this body.
So when his body turned to ash, it was not because of his doing, it was because of God's doing. God says, from dust you came, and dust you shall return. So all bodies, at some point, go to, your flesh does deteriorate, your bones do deteriorate, so your bones do get brittle over time, and they do go to ash at some point. The longer the time you have, the more time it gets, the more it's going to deteriorate. That's a given. That's just a biological fact. When you shouldn't be cremated is because you shouldn't make the choice. It's almost like saying, I'm going to sin anyways, so why shouldn't I just sin? Because that's ignorant. You're predisposed to sin, yes. Doesn't mean you go out and sin and go, well, why wouldn't I? Because I'm already predisposed. That's not the point. The point is you don't do it because God said don't do it, right? Same with cremation. You're going to be going to ash anyways. The point is when God says when you're in control, you don't do it. When you're fit, you're not really in control. When he's collaborating with you, that option of choice, you go bodily buried all day long. But when God's in charge, he's going to tell you, when you bodily bury yourself, what's he going to do to your body? Bring it to ash. That's what he does. But that wasn't our role. Just like remember when David was told by the servant, oh, I saw Saul fell on his sword, so I finished it for him, cut his head off. Not cut his head off. I cut him through with the sword. No, you don't do that, man. And he killed him. Remember that? Because you don't justify finishing the job just because you're trying to justify. No. David said he's God's anointed. Let him live within his consequence. Let him die out his suicidal action. Don't you do that. You can't do this little mercy killing thing. You can't do that. Euthanasia? Wrong. You can't do that. You can't do that. You say, well, why not? Because Scripture was clear. When Saul was dying, that's what the servant thought he was doing was a righteous thing. And David said, it doesn't matter what you think. It's God's anointed person, period. There's no comment section. You can't touch him. Let him die. Let him die. I know it's painful. He brought that on himself. Let it happen. If the Lord brought it on, let it be what it is. There's no euthanasia in the Bible. Let it go. Let it go. If you do that, that's wrong. So when Elijah went to ash, and so did Enoch, they didn't do that. God did that. Because God said he would do that. With them, the difference was he did it in the air. With us, he does it in the ground. That's the only difference. We both go to ash. What's the big difference? The difference is neither one of us had a choice. Neither one of us had a choice. Neither one of us have a choice. When we go to ash, neither one of us chose to go to ash. If we follow God's will, going to ash is on God's time of that equation. We get bodily buried, God then brings us to ash. We get raptured up, our bodies go to ash because our bodies are sinful, flesh and bone, death vessels that cannot go to heaven. They are brought to death and then ash sent. They go to ash. Dust you shall be coming from, dust shall return.
So is someone sinning if they have themselves cremated?
I've always spoke about this, that yes, you should not be cremated. If the issue is this, it's like the turtle dove issue and bringing on forth the sacrifice. God's a reasonable God. He says if you're poor and you're ignorant or poor, those are forgivable offenses. But if you know and you have the means, you're supposed to be bodily buried, yes. If you're ignorant to why and you don't have the means to, either one or both, then you're excused.
See, my sister had the power of attorney, and she did the cremation for both parents. She did it more for convenience than cost.
Yeah.
I didn't have any power at all. I could just watch her direct traffic.
Yeah, so the thing is that a lot of people have loved ones that have been cremated. I know we have, I know Lainey had, we all have. And so God's not going to be, judgmental board. It's about knowing and having the means. If you know what's right, the Scripture is clear. To him who knows what is right and doesn't do it, to him it's evil. That's clear. Then also there's the means. God makes that clear in the Old Testament. If they don't have the means to have a sacrifice, give them forth a pigeon or a turtle dove. So God is clear that he makes alternative means for those who don't have them. And he's also clear you're only accountable to what you know unless you have a high station of teaching. So for the majority of people, it's knowing and having means. If you know and have the means, then why would you be cremated? You can't do that. You can, but you're in sin if you do that. If you do it otherwise, then God's going to give you a free pass because you didn't fall under those two categories of knowing and having means. Yes?
Lainey said Kevorkian method.
Yeah.
And then intent of the part, it is much more difficult to accept cremation. Cremation is becoming much more expensive also.
Yeah, so the point of Todd's question is a good one, is that, hey, wait a minute, we said not to be cremated, so why did God just cremate, if you will, Elijah? But he didn't actually. Think about it. Was there fire involved? In Elijah's case, there was, wasn't there? A fiery chariot. But was he actually engulfed in the fire? I would say no. Was his body turned to ash because of the fiery chariot? I would say no. No, Enoch wasn't in fire. It just says he walked with God and he was not. So there's no fire need to be associated to go to ash, just like with us in the ground. There's no fire associated for us to have eventually our bodies just go into some dust back to be returned. There's no fire needed for that. When you're bodily buried and you just deteriorate, there's no fire. It just happens, right?
And when he's taken like that, I mean, time is no more for him. So it takes time to go to dust, but the time issue is removed, so he's already dust.
Yeah, so yes.
And Lainey said that is such a great insight.
Yeah, so you remember there's a so two big distinctions. One, you can't choose an option to be cremated. And two, cremation by de facto involves fire. Elijah and Enoch were not put to ash by fire. The only thing you might, but the question is Elijah, Enoch, I said Elijah. Enoch and Elijah were not put to ash by fire when they brought up to heaven. You could argue Elijah was, but it was a chariot of fire, not him being on fire. It didn't say that. It didn't say he turned into some comic book character and burst into flames. That's not what it says. It says the chariot was on fire, the chariot of fire, not him. So I'm not saying his flesh was not destroyed by fire. It was just brought to dust, just like Enoch. Just like with us, when we choose to honor God the right way, we're bodily buried, but then our bodies in the grave, apart from fire, apart from our choice, are brought to dust. Just like with Enoch and Elijah. Same exact process of principle. How we got there is different. We went through the ground to get there. They went through the air to get there. But we both had the same principles involved. We didn't choose it, and there was no fire involved. It's that simple. And that's why you don't do it. You don't choose to disobey God. And you certainly don't involve fire on a vessel that he lives in. You don't do that.
You know what gets me is, if you're living and you die by suicide, that's one thing, but it's almost like cremation is some suicide of the body after death.
No, you don't. It's interesting. It's a suicide after death of the body. It's interesting. Yeah, you're killing it, and you shouldn't be. I mean, I don't want to get involved in this too much, but yes. So that answers your question, Todd. Does that answer your question? Hopefully about yes.
And he said, what scripture do you recommend when people ask about cremation?
Oh my gosh,
And
there's
Todd said yes.
There's tons of scriptures, but I would go particularly Ezekiel 37, the valley of dry bones, not dry ashes. And I'd go to Genesis chapter 50 when it comes to Joseph saying, carry my bones back to out of Egypt. So in both places you have bones. They didn't say ash. Carry my bones. Carry my bones back. So again, there's no ash. So
Then it must take a long, long time to go back to ash. Because,
correct.
I mean, it was hundreds of years and he would still have his bones?
I know, correct. I know, it's interesting.
Wow.
I know. It does take they say there's some fossils now found from thousands of years ago that the bigger bones take a while to get brittle. The little bones don't take that long, but big bones like the femur and all they take a while to get brittle. That's what some of these, if you read about fossilization, not to get too involved in that malarkey of so-called pseudoscience, but some of those legitimate people will be honest with you and tell you that there's when they excavate and see human remains, you got to be very careful because sometimes they just disintegrate in your hands. They're so brittle. But not the skull, the femur, the big bones take longer.
And remember, the mummies are preserved. I mean, so that they don't go back to dust.
Yeah.
But I wonder, is there anything out there that says how long it would normally take somebody's body to go to dust? I guess there is.
I don't know. I don't know. Yes, sorry, I don't know. Good question.
And Lainey said that is what I have used for sure. Great.
Yep. All right, so we're off topic a little bit, so we're getting up. So back to Moses and Joshua as a precursor to Elijah and Elisha. So Moses, again, was a veiled beginning, just like Elijah was a veiled beginning from their origins of not knowing from which they came. They didn't know where Moses came from until later that he was an Israelite. They didn't know where Elijah came from, except for he's a Tishbite of Gideon. But they both ended up their last days passing the baton to their successor around the same area, which is on the southeast side of the Jordan. Interesting. So they crossed over, and neither one of them crossed back over. They died once they crossed over. which we get some people thinking about the Jordan River as a venue from life to death kind of thing, and then the afterlife. Because there's a song by Southern Gospel, you know, I crossed over the Jordan River, because they speak of like Moses and Elijah in their mind. Because when they crossed over, they didn't come back. So interesting. Then you find the spirit of John the Baptist, who was also, he always would go back over to the Jordan River and come back and preach. So since he lived in the east region of the east side of the Jordan, they go, huh. That's why they were thinking, oh, is he Elijah, the prophet? He has the power and spirit of Elijah. That's why they would say stuff like that. Also, when it comes to Moses and Moshe and Elijah, you have another issue here. They both trained up their successors who did things different from themselves and completing that which they began to do. Elisha began to call Israel away from idolatry, and Elisha continued that on, but at a much grander scale. I would argue with you that Moses started the Exodus from Egypt to get them away from idolatry into their inheritance of worshiping their God. But Joshua did much more than that by actually bringing them into the land. God used them to bring them into the land and have their entrance and inheritance into that land flowing with milk and honey. So very interesting. Just like similarity between Moses and Elijah have a similarity of judgment when they did their miracles and signs. Their prophetic ministry starts off with judgment, didn't it? Oh yeah. Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, kaboom, lays down the law. Same with Elijah. Elijah and Moses have something else in common. They have some earmarks of remembrance where they had problems not following the Lord's will in their life. You know, when Elijah was scared out of his mind when Jezebel was coming after him. You know, when Elijah was saying, there's no one else but me, and the Lord goes, there's more people over here that don't worship, you know, just so you know. Moses was the same way. I can't go for Pharaoh. He goes, oh, geez, it's your brother Aaron. Remember when Moses struck the rock? Moses made mistakes. Elijah made mistakes. They're unique in that way that their mistakes are really known by a lot of people then and now. So they're also earmarked by having notable mistakes that don't seem to make sense given their godly character. Moses and like Abraham, think about the people of God in the Old Testament. You have Noah, a man of righteousness in God's eyes. Abram, a friend of God. Moses was also called a friend of God. And he talked to him face to face, it says. Yikes, like a friend, right? And then you have Daniel, a man of a precious beloved, he said. Job, God's champion servant. But Elijah and Elisha, they were called men of God. It even says that in the book of James. The effective prayer of a righteous man, a man of God, is powerful and effective. Wow. The prayer, so it's Elijah he was talking about, but also spills over to Elisha later on. So you have a difference in how Elijah and Moses are both, they come on the scene with judgment, was their first statement of their miracles, signs, and wonders. Also, when it comes to Moses and Elijah, they, again, as I mentioned to you, with Elisha and with Joshua, they both cross over from east to west into Canaan land to begin their really earmark of their demonstrative beginning of their being used by God's hand. Elisha crossed back over the Jordan after Elijah was taken up into heaven. He split it and crosses over. He comes in this way is where you have, he comes in through Jericho is where Joshua does and takes down Jericho. Interesting now, I'm going to go to Scripture for a moment and also remind you of Jericho. Let me show you something about Jericho where Joshua says, well, the Lord says through Joshua in chapter 6, Jericho becomes another earmark of interesting similitude. So Joshua says in chapter 6 of verse 26, on that day Joshua uttered an imprecation before the Lord, saying, cursed be the man who shall rebuild this city, meaning Jericho in the context. And he says, this is in verse 25, he talks about Jericho, with his firstborn let him lay the foundation, and with his youngest son erect its gates. And so did Hillel and Bethelite, he said, lay the foundation. But again, Joshua said, cursed be the man who rebuilds this city. Do you know what Jericho speaks to? It speaks to the fact that Ahab also rebuilt the city. You go, what? Well, yeah. Go to 1 Kings chapter 16. 1 Kings 16, Ahab, the king where Elijah came against. Ahab also made a bower and proceeded on adding to his provocations to provoke the Lord of Israel and to destroy his own soul. He did evil of all the kings of Israel who were before him. 1 Kings 16, verse 33. Verse 34. And he says here that he actually, in verse 34, now in the days of Ahiel the Bethelite, he rebuilt Jericho. What? And Joshua said, cursed be the man who does that. What does Jericho speak to? Did you also know that in Jericho, you have the time when they actually preserved all the gold and silver vessels therein to bring them into the house of the Lord? What? So let's get this straight. Jericho is destroyed by Joshua. It's then rebuilt by Ahab. Joshua said, if you do that, cursed be the man. Jericho is associated with the beginning between when they went into the entrance and inheritance. It's the precursor of their entrance and inheritance, which from that city, they didn't destroy the gold and silver vessels. They took them out and put them in the house of the Lord. Interesting. The Jericho represents the rebuilding of the temple for the demonic worship, as we know, in tribulation period. Jericho is the actual typology and symbolism of being rebuilt, the temple, because they think that's the temple the Messiah will come into. And we all know that's not the case. He makes his own temple. That's not the temple he comes into. The one that's rebuilt is not his. That's for the Antichrist, for the beast. Yikes. And that's why, sorry, you're not supposed to rebuild the temple. It's a type of Jericho being rebuilt. And that's why it's associated with the temple, because they both were destroyed not to be rebuilt. But when they're rebuilt, they use the gold and silver vessels to reinstitute it back again as if to sanction it's okay. Oh my gosh, it's not okay. It's not okay. But it's the precursor of it being destroyed unto then the Messianic reign, just like it was in their day. And by the way, Joshua started his ministry, the first miracle, through Jericho. Elisha, when he comes over the River Jordan, starts his ministry in Jericho. You think that's coincidence, by the way? Both successors of Elijah and Moses start their ministry of doing some miracles and work from God in Jericho. Yes?
Vicky said, bless you.
Sorry, yeah. So then you have, so going back to Moses and Elijah, some more parallels. Some more parallels of Moses and Elijah. Not just that, Moses and Elijah were both outsiders. They were both outsiders. They both had this loner outsider mentality. You go, what do you mean? Well, Elijah went into his own little loner place when he was fed from the ravens, right? By the ravens. He had many times, there was not really consulting and counseling with the kings. You do see that with Elisha. You do not see that with Elijah. He's a confronter, a challenger. Elijah confronts and challenges you to live what's right by God. He actually, dare I say, even mocks you. Moses did something similar. When he was used by God, what did he do? He challenged the Pharaoh. Let us go. He was an outsider at that point, being from the shepherd 40 years of wanderings and to his place to realize God could use anybody. Then he comes back with this challenging outsider viewpoint of do this or die kind of thing. Do it or suffer the consequences. He's very demonstrative. Jericho with Joshua and with Elisha, they don't seem to have that same challenging, in-your-face ministry. You do see that in-your-face, challenging, outsider viewpoint with Elijah and Moses. So again, their beginnings, their judgment ministry, the way they come as an outsider and they challenge people to believe in God or else, it's very demonstrative. Remember Moses, draws a line in the sand, everyone's on my side's on my side, that side's on that side, and what happened? The ground opens up, and what happened? Fire came down and destroyed people. What with Elijah? He said, oh, put your God who answered by fire, and he doused his sacrifice, and what happened? The God of fire came down. So they both have this real, when they came on the scene, it was more of a reverent issue. They were much more revered, and they were much more scary, if you will, than Joshua and Elisha, respectfully. Joshua and Elisha were not some slouches, but their ministry, their miracles, what they did by what God used them for was nothing near the same as Moses and Elijah. And that's why, no coincidence, those are the two witnesses in tribulation. That's why they're there, because those guys command respect, and they command that, when they talk, God's judgment speaks. This is not going to be fun. And God's talking about a day of reckoning. When they talk, it's judgment, it's reckoning, it's holiness, it's pay attention. it's like, whoa, playtime's over. They are very in your face. So when you get in your face with those two guys, and because they know that those guys, God used them to bring miracles, and then death and carnage followed, literally. Baal's prophets of Baal, 300 were killed under Elijah. Under Moses, a couple people, thousands were killed, and the earth opened up. They're like, these guys, they don't play. These guys, people died. I mean, masses of them died. These guys God uses them to bring death. God uses them to bring life as well. But he brings judgment and a day of reckoning. And that's why they're the ones, the two witnesses in tribulation. You can see that the symmetry of that, right? And again, it's not coincidental. They both, again, have their last breath in the same region on the southeast side of the Jordan River. So as we continue on, I want to see also that when you get also the other process of it is, well, God the Father and God the Son are in view here as well. So God the Father is in view when he's talking about judgment. He's talking about a day of reckoning, because that's what Jesus, God the Son, came to do. He came to take on our judgment for the day of reckoning, to be our sin sacrifice, to be our Paschal lamb. But the transition period happened. So Moses and Joshua were a precursor of Elijah and Elisha, which were both precursors of the third divine example. They were all leading to the example of showing you the baton being passed from God the Father's judgment, time of reckoning, to a softer ministry of deliverance and restoration and inheritance and entrance in view with Yeshua, God the Son. You go, I don't understand what you mean. Think about this. With Joshua's ministry, was not the entrance and inheritance a reality? Yes. In Elisha's ministry, did not he restore like Elijah did, but wasn't it he who died and his bones in chapter 13, they threw a guy and he rose up from the dead? Wait. A dead man was thrown into the bones of Elisha, and he jumps up and comes back to life. Wait a second. So Elijah showed you that God used him to typify what? Resurrection and the life. Shut up. What a coincidence. Joshua and Elisha were symbolisms of totality of who Christ came and is to be. Our entrance, our inheritance, our resurrection, and our life. Yowza. And that's why Moses and Elijah were there to show you they were the judgment, day of reckoning. Get it right. Listen up, people, to God the Father. Pay attention. Seek out that which is in your heart and listen and hear to God. There's a new sheriff in town. So God the Father was typified in the persons of Moses and Elijah, which was then typified with Joshua and Elisha, were the precursor typifying Christ himself. Was those two symbolisms of Moses and Joshua, Elijah and Elisha, were the precursor to show God the Father passing the baton to God the Son.
And of course, a close relationship between all three sets. Close relationship between Moses and Joshua, and close relationship between Elijah. And there wasn't any jealousy. I mean, there wasn't like Moses like, oh, I'm so jealous of you, you get to go in the promised land. There wasn't that.
No, there was no jealousy. No, there wasn't. There was no jealousy. And that's why John the Baptist is not the same as Elijah and Moses in that typology, because that's not the same, because Jesus was not a successor of John the Baptist. Nuh-uh. Joshua was a successor of Moses. Elisha was a successor of Elijah. Jesus, Yeshua, was not a successor of John the Baptist. Wrong. That's where you can't correlate that symmetry.
No,
he was a pair of the way.
No mention of any friction at all between Moses and Joshua or Elijah and Elisha.
There's only one friction, a little bit, when Joshua had a comment where he didn't like it. I forget the people's names. They were prophesying, and Elisha went to chastise them, and Moses said, "Don't do that." That's the only time you find some kind of not really it's just a correction, I guess you could say. There was a little bit of correction there, but it's minor compared to the problems that we know he had with God, Moses, and Elijah had with God. They're more pronounced. We know that they both had issues with staying true. Even though they did mighty things, they both had some issues we always remember. Isn't that crazy? They did much more good than they did bad when they were under God's hand, but yet we always make fun of them for the bad. Come on. We always remember the 10 plagues that Moses had in the Passover and the parting of the Red Sea and the manna and the water from the rock. But we also remember he struck the rock twice, and he got mad at God. And he smashed the tablets. You can't do that. Elijah, remember when he got scared of Jezebel and he ran and hid. Remember he was the only one, and God had to remind him, no, you're not. Yes.
Lainey said kind of like Paul and Peter's personality.
Little bit, yeah. Paul used to be Mr. Judgment and Mr. Heavy Hand, but that changed a lot. Remember, the book of Acts is not a book of missionary congregational elaboration, people always say in churchianity. It's a word picture of the first 10 chapters about the history, yes, of the early congregation growing and their understanding as a people in unity. And then from chapters 10 on, the transition came to the Apostle Paul and showing him as a microcosm of what's expected of us in our growth. And that's what, and there's going to have struggles. You're going to have some hurts and pains. You're going to have some traumatic experiences. But through it all, stick with it. Stay true to the course. You'll have some loss of friends. Barnabas and Paul, they lost each other's friendship. It's painful. You'll have ostracization from those that are like kindred spirit. Paul was rejected by his own apostles. His own people didn't want to go near him. But yet, stay with the course. Stay with the process. Stay on God's will for your life, and the end will be a full blessing for you. But along the way, it's filled with some processes, right? So Paul changed a lot. James and John, same way. James was the fire down from heaven guy, but he ended his life kind of more assuaged. Remember, he was more peaceful. So, but yeah, I know what you mean, though. It kind of that's. But I don't want to say that because then the misnomer becomes people think of Paul in the churchianity ways if he's always been this wild bull in the china shop guy. No, that's how he was. Then he came to Christ. He was still that way a little bit, but you see him get softened more as time goes on. He uses more and more of God's wisdom in his life being just formed and fashioned in him a new man, literally, as he was preaching and teaching. That's why he says, put off the old man, put on the new. He could testify firsthand what it was about. He had tendencies he had to die to. The tendency to be confrontational, tendency to hold people accountable before he was compassionate, tendency to lead with doctrine over application. He had tendency to do this, tendency to condescend a woman or a younger man. He had a tendency to do this, and he had to overcome all this. And his life, he did that very thing. He did that. And it's a remarkable thing that he was changed. People say people don't change. He sure did. I mean, good gracious. But it wasn't him changing himself. It was God changing him. So he's a great, again, I don't want to ever say that about Paul. I know what you're saying, but that was the beginning before he was a covenant. When he came in Testament, he began to just be more metamorphosized by God himself. Yes?
Laney said that really brings it out about how Paul changed.
Yeah, so, all right, so I'm thirsty. So going back again, so John the Baptist, so if Moses is a precursor of the successor Joshua, Elijah is a precursor of the successor Elisha, and they both combined represent God the Father transitioning to God the Son, from God the Father being the one who brings forth the judgment announcement, the day of restitution announcement, the day of listen up and obey me announcement, to Christ, who was typified by Joshua and Elisha, bringing into the ushering of an entrance, an inheritance. Bringing in, pictured by him going into Canaan land and Joshua. Bringing in the Elisha typology of bringing us to life and resurrection, as Elisha's bones example did. So what does John the Baptist fit into that? He's not a precursor of Jesus. He's not the one who then Jesus succeeded. No, he was a preparer of the way. So what he was just, again, a representation of God the Father saying to us through that person of John the Baptist, he was like the voice, or again, like it says, the voice in the wilderness. He was the voice of God saying, that typology of those four men is now being, at this moment in time, to be announced. It's about to be fulfilled. And John the Baptist is the announcer. He's the proclaimer, the preparer of the way for that. Yet for Jesus to be the one declared as this is the one leading up to from those four other men. Yes?
I think about, the throne of God and the Lamb. I think about the creation of the heavens and the earth. There wouldn't be and the Lamb if there weren't in the earth.
Yeah, that's true. There wouldn't be. That's true. That's right. There's the God of heaven and the earth, and that's why it's the throne of God and the Lamb, because the Lamb's of the earth. That's a good point. So there's a lot of different things there in this and the symmetry, the symbolism. But I wanted to make sure you saw that both, again, Elijah and Moses ended their last breaths on the southeast side of the Jordan. Both Elisha and Joshua started their ministry on the southwest side of the Jordan. What a coincidence. What a coincidence, right?
But the north, what was it, the north?
So here, the southeast side is where Elijah and Moses breathed their last breath. And on the southwest side is where you have Jericho mentioned, where Joshua and Elisha began their earmark of being used by God. So, by the way, something else about the symmetry between Moses, Joshua, Elijah, Elisha, and Jesus being brought into view, and John the Baptist. Did not John the Baptist sound a lot like Moses and Elijah when it comes to being an outsider, being a person who confronts you, who challenges you? Yeah, yeah. Joshua and Elisha weren't like that. Elijah and Moses were very confrontative, very combative, very announcement of judgment, announcement of day of reckoning. Sounds a lot like John the Baptist. That's why they were saying he has the power and spirit of Elijah. No joke, because that's what they're saying that for, right? But the reality is, well, wait a minute. When it comes to that, you got to say, well, when it comes to all of that process of thought, think about what happened with Elisha and Elijah. They actually, Elisha and Elijah being different. Elijah challenges you to believe, where Elisha is not that way. He's more a rewarder of people who have faith. You find, you'll see that later on. Just like Jesus made that comment many times. Your faith has made you whole. They believe, and he would then say, your belief has made you whole. I'd never seen such great faith in all of Israel. So then he healed the man's servant. So you find Jesus being a rewarder of people with faith, that he gave them faith, and then he rewards them for exhibiting that faith. You find that more so with Jesus. But you also find with Jesus, he does have the spirit of Elijah as well a little bit. That's why I thought he was Elijah as well, because he did have a time where he has a judgment message, a time of reconciliation message, a time of coming down to the nuts and bolts, right? He did have some harsh turning over the temple moments, right? So he did both. So he was both. He was, because why? Because he is the divine Godhead. In him, the fullness of the Godhead dwelt bodily, Colossians 2:9. So he is the fullness of the Godhead, but he just primarily shows more of Elisha's character, but he did have some of Elijah and Moses' character as well, even though he showed more so the Joshua character and the Elisha character being resembled in him, as far as in the one who would lead us to an entrance, an inheritance, Joshua. The one who would give us life and resurrection, Elisha. The one who would actually have to, by the way, think about the faith that Elisha and Joshua had to have. They both were given a training up by their successors. And it says that Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane said, not my will, but thy will be done, showing you that he was subjected to the will of the one imposed upon him as the Son. Just like Joshua did not create his own ministry, he was subjected to the one Moses gave him. Just like Elisha was subjected to the one Elijah gave him. That's what God the Son's doing. He said, I didn't even consider equality with God something to be grasped, meaning he, as the Son who agreed beforehand to be the one who would come to the earth and be the Savior, he did not even in Matthew 26 in the Garden of Gethsemane decide to confront God the Father. He said, no, I relent. I relent. So they have a relenting, more passive, more agreeable, more submissive obedience to a example Joshua and Elisha did. Think about Joshua. He sees him and Caleb, they see the giants in the land. By the way, they were pretty massive giants, by the way. Just talking about 12-foot guys, maybe 30-foot guys and gals. They're pretty huge. I'm reading this book about giants. And some people Josephus writes a comment that I said, is that a typo? The dude said they were 400 cubits. Dude, that's like a skyscraper. That goes beyond giant. That goes insanity. You're talking about their heads in the clouds at this point. That's insane. So he talks about, I don't know if that's an exaggeration. I don't know. I just know that's crazy. So imagine him saying they're grasshoppers in our eyes. We are to them grasshoppers. And him and Caleb are like, we can do this. Their faith was just so like just wow. Like Moses was rattled by his faith. Remember, well, listen to me. I remember Elijah. I'm the only one. No, Jezebel's coming after me. They both kind of got rattled. Joshua never got rattled. Elisha never got rattled. Just like Jesus, Yeshua, never got rattled. Ever. They challenged him. Who are you? Who are you? They challenged him constantly. And he said back, who do you say John the Baptist is? Who do you say this is? Who do you say? He would always, Satan tried to rattle him. He's like, I'm starving. All I got's water. I'm not rattled. What? I mean, they were put in some bad situations, not rattled at all. It just speaks to this whole sense of like deep-rooted faith. Not saying that Moses and Elijah weren't. I'm just saying you didn't see that. You see that with Joshua and Elisha pictured in God the Son. That the faith of not being rattled, not that God the Father typified by those men is rattled. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he's pointing out the differences in how when you come with judgment, when you come with reconciliation, you come with a time of coming to terms with an accountability, you're going to get rattled. But when you come with the message of restoration and a message of peace and love, with inheritance, with entrance, and then with resurrection and life, judgment's mixed into that, but it's dominantly the other one. So you're not rattled. Yes, sorry.
Oh gosh, what was I thinking? I guess it'll come back to me.
Sorry, that's okay.
I guess what is, yeah, okay, so Elisha had water, didn't he?
Yeah.
Christ for 40 days and nights had no water, no food, no nothing.
That's right. Well, we had water. They had water, didn't he? Because you have to have water or else you die, right? 40 days? You have to have water, don't you?
Well, but it's Christ.
Yeah, well, you had no food, that's for sure. Was it food or water? I know there's no food. I got back and read that
I
again.
can't remember if Satan said do something to make himself water, did he?
No, food. Make food. Make something bread. So when you, but I tell you this though, when it comes to the issue of also Moses, Joshua.
Vicky said you have to have water.
Yeah, you have to have water.
But
I'm
you
going to say.
might have gotten it from the dew in
Yeah.
the morning.
Yeah, you got it from the dew, maybe from a cactus or whatnot, but you have to have water or else you can't. Yeah, you had to have that. So, but it was the substance he didn't have. That you can go without, but the water you have to have or else you dehydrate and you die. So even though he is Christ, he was showing his humanity that whole process. But the interesting part is that also with that symmetry, you also have another piece of that where when you see Elisha, we'll look at this story later, but Elisha had a moment. I didn't really remember this myself. And studying this and seeing the typology of it, seeing the symbolism of it, I was like, oh, wow. I don't know if you know this, but Elisha had some bread. He had 20 loaves of barley and some figs, and he fed many people. Sound familiar? Yeah, Jesus had twice fed people with few rations, fed many. So Elisha, what a coincidence, fed many with few. You're like, what? Yeah. So again, another typology speaking to the precursor of Christ to come. So it's just really interesting, the similarities of this. And so all that being said is just to bring the background of the groundswell. We're going to get into Elijah and Elisha, but in order to get into that understanding of what's happening here, you have to see these things for what they are. So again, Jericho, and I'm going to write on the board later on all these things out so you remember. You got to know kind of the players, if you will, like a key, a legend on a map. So Jericho is a typology that what was destroyed should not be rebuilt, and when you do, you're cursed. Just like the temple, when it's destroyed, when it's rebuilt, it's a curse. Not good. Not good. And what happens later on is that when they both are then dealt with, they have to be out of the way before you have an entrance and an inheritance. So you also have again with Elijah and Moses being typology to each other, you have Joshua and Elisha typology to each other. That overall speaks to God the Father, leading to the highlight of the baton, all authority given over to the Lamb, to Jesus, God the Son, who then is the one who's now we see in the New Testament. John the Baptist is not a priest, a predecessor of Christ, who is then his successor. No, he is a voice in the wilderness, as he said. He's the announcer. He's the preparer of the way of God the Son. Elijah and Moses were in symbolism preparing the way of God the Father's announcement through the Old Testament people, a time of judgment, restitution, time of coming, of reckoning. That's what that was about, which then was followed by, again, their typology of Joshua and Elisha was typified Christ and so on. So I hope that makes sense so far where I'm at. Does that make sense? You with me, I hope? So there's a lot there, I know, but again, the overall story of Elijah and Elisha speaks to the tribulation period. Let's go into that now. Tribulation period. Elijah crossed over, then he vanishes. He's a type of mature ones. You say, why is he type of mature? You say he's type of God the Father. I know in a higher level of spiritual realm, that's where he's type of God the Father on. Now, from a human realm, he's the type of again, these people who are the mature ones, foolish and wise. You say, what do you mean foolish and wise? Because he acted like both. That's why. He acted like both. He had Sunemi and Diana. He acted like both. More so the wise, but he had a little bit of, they were showing you the growth of this person. Interesting enough, when you have Elijah cross over one time to Jordan, Elisha crossed over twice. Because Elijah split the waters, he crossed over. Elisha crossed back. But how did Elisha cross back? With the same mantle that Elijah crossed over with. Interesting. Interesting. By the way, we saw on Friday already that the Jordan River, when Joshua crossed it, that was a type of wave one because he actually crossed over and there's all of this water stacked up high. Hello, that's huge. That's the stacked up knowledge that never stops because the water was flowing. They kept stacking up, which shows the never-ending insight of wisdom that God gives to the faithful ones who become the bride. And here you have Joshua being that, whereas when Elijah and Elisha parted the Jordan River, that's not what happened, it says. It didn't say the water stacked up. It wasn't flowing down at that time of the year. It just split it open and they walked across. But then Elisha walks back on the same mantle that got him over the first time. It's the same mantle that gets him back over again. Speaking of, Elijah is only for the first half of tribulation, and Elisha goes through both halves of tribulation, and his light bulb doesn't turn on until the second half of where he really goes on fire for being used by God, like the Sumeticoi do. They are given the ministry, the same ministry of the mature ones, but they take it to the other level of producing 100 fruit, and they come back over. That's why Elisha's double portion represents them. He exceeded Elijah's miracles, likened unto the Sumeticos people. Sumeticoi exceed the station of a mature one. They go above a wise virgin because they become part of the bride, because they're living here on this earth as the 144,000, and they produce that fruit yield. Now, with that being said, there's a couple other things too. So I wrote these down to remind me. So when you have, I got to remind myself of this. Lots going from my memory here. So then you have Jehoram. Jehoram is the king between Elijah and Elisha. Jehoram is the king that Elijah finished. He went up to heaven under Jehoram's reign, and then Elisha took over. Jehoram or Joram, depending on what translation you have, it's the same guy. Jehoram, Joram. So this guy in Israel, so he was the last king Elijah was under before he taken up into heaven, and Elisha took over. This king, coincidentally, killed 6 of his brothers. That sounds a lot like the midpoint tribulation when the beast turns and kills some of those kings following him, doesn't it? Oh, yowza. And then you have his wife, who was the, again, daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. Her name, Adhaliah. She actually was not good. She was a type of the queen who was in the tribulation period, the Catholic Church. And she is this whore who is whoring herself out because she takes any spiritual type of language and says it's all good, it's all the same. You know, it's what Catholics do today. The word Catholic means general for a reason, because their general precept is if you're a Buddhist, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, it doesn't matter. As long as you believe in God, we're all many paths to one God. No, we're not. But they keep teaching this. And the comedic joke about that is if all paths lead home, then just take any road when you leave here today. Take any road, and you'll just go home then. Take any road. Of course, there's not all roads lead to the same place. That's insanity. There's only certain roads that go to your house. Not all roads go to your house. Let's get real. Don't be ignorant. So
the hypocrisy, the many paths, but they had the Inquisition because they said one path. They didn't want,
yeah. And that's the whore of the queen, the whore of Babylon, the queen. And Revelation 18, she thinks she's all that. When the beast rises up, he takes her out. Just like this daughter is killed under Joash, which is the last king you see. She's killed, and under Joash's reign, she's taken out. That's the last king that Elisha was under. But Joram is the one they both had in their stay of their prophetic timeline with God. Joram is the one, or Jehoram is the one that took over, who was coincidentally the one who killed 6 of his brothers.
Joram and Jehoram are the same?
Same guy. Okay. Yeah, just like you say Elias or Elijah is the same. So they have different, now I'll put that on the board later for you, but they have different names and how the vernacular is used and what translation you may use. So there's like a Joash, the same guy. How do you say it? It's different. The difference is there is 2 Joashes though, by the way. There's one who's the king of Judah's side, and there's one king of Israel's side. But again, so they both have this daughter of Ahab and Jezebel in line, because Elijah started with Jezebel. What do we find in tribulation mentioned? To the church, the church people he talks about in Thyatira, he mentions Jezebel, because that spirit is alive. Why would he mention that? because you have the spirit of Elijah is alive in the power of what his symbolism and similitude brought to the forefront in tribulation period was to deal with that issue. And he dealt with that issue with his pronouncement of judgment and reconciliation, a time of reckonings coming. Yes?
Tracy said, wait, Catholics believe that? I thought they believed they were the only true Christian religion in Baha'i.
No, you can, no, you,
She said Baha'i believes all religions lead to God.
you have Catholics, Catholics in their core, yes. Catholics have a belief that they're all religions they're the only ones they are to get to heaven. That's correct. They do believe that. I'm just saying they have an inclusion. This goes back to the 70s and 80s. You can look this up. It's in many books. There's books, you'd be surprised. There's books online that says Buddhism and Catholicism, and written by a Catholic priest. I'm not joking you. I'm just telling you right now. There's meetings that the Pope calls with leaders of other religions to have one congruent understanding of coming together as one. Again, you can read about this stuff. You can Google all day long. The Pope has called meetings with other religious leaders to call for one religious unity among Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and all this kind of stuff, and Jews and Christians. So yes, they believe they're the right ones, but they're willing to. But they want to be the leader of all the other ones. They want to have them all. Their end game is they believe they're the only ones to get to heaven. Yes, but they want everybody else to be acquiesced together as one, as they become the head of all of these. And that's why they're the whore, because they're whoring themselves out. They're the whore with many people. And so they think they're the queen, because they want to be the head of all these religions. So they think they're the one, yes, but they want to be the one with many partners. Because they're bad. They're bad hombres, if you will.
I remember, of course, Trump had all the different religions.
Yeah, Trump he's got some background with that, yeah.
And then, of course, remember, he's from the borough of
Queens, oh gosh. Yeah, what's yeah, babe?
Vicky said ecumenicalism, and Pam said this current Pope sure does all that
Yeah.
all the time. And Lady said more money. Pam said Jesuit, and Tracy, that's NWO stuff. They don't really believe.
Just think of how Solomon tried to marry into the daughters of the pagan kings around him so he could make peace with the kingdoms around him. So he did the same thing that the Catholic Church is doing now. They're trying to think they're like the wisdom of Solomon. They could be the one true belief, but in order to have them acquiesce to that, they have to also take on their beliefs as well as being true. That's what the Catholics are doing. Yes, they think they're the hub, but they want all the spokes to go back to them. They want Islam in them, Hindu in them, Buddhist in them. They want it all going through them so that they're the hub, and they're the whore, they're the queen, because a whore has many partners, hence the term. And she is a queen because she's stuck on herself like she's all this. And that's what Satan uses because they're so ignorant. He uses them for the one world religion. Yes?
Yes, first of all, Tracy had said that's NWO stuff. They don't really believe in Christian religion.
Yep.
New World Order, and Lady said, is this the commerce spoken of in Revelation, and they are distraught?
Well, no, so there's two different Babylons. There's commercial, remember there's economic Babylon, there's ecumenical Babylon. So the religious Babylon is the Catholic belief system, one world religion, that's the religious Babylon. Then the economic Babylon goes through the whole New World Order of the 10 different kings and so forth. That's two different things. There's two Babylons. There's the economic Babylon and there's the other Babylon where it's the religious aspect of it. So
Lady said, okay.
the religious Babylon gets taken out in the midpoint, and the economical Babylon, the world religion, the world government, that goes on. So the economic Babylon lasts the entire 7 years, but the religious Babylon is taken out in midpoint because the beast needs no longer to be deceiving and delusional anymore. He didn't care anymore. He just comes out and says, yeah, so you hate me. So what? I'll take you out. You come against me. Okay. So he didn't need no religious anymore, people trying to persuade people. That's of no use to him anymore. That's where the whole mark of the beast comes in at that point. Because the mark of the beast replaces the religious Babylon, the queen. That's why she's taken out in Revelation 18. You read the whole chapter. She gets all big on herself. she has this attitude when he's wounded that, oh, he's not coming back. And she starts to take her place as if she's all that. And then he comes back and says, what do you think you're doing? And they're like, and they're just wiped off the map. I couldn't imagine that horrific sight. I mean, it's just horrific. But anyway.
See, that's interesting. Moses and Elijah are taken out about the same time religious Babylon's taken out.
Elijah is, Elisha is the type that goes through the entire time. Elisha is the same.
Witnesses are taken out about the same time religious.
Elijah and Moses, yeah, Elijah and Moses, yep. Elijah and Moses represent, they're taken out right before in typology, they're taken out in the midpoint, at the middle point, and that's the same time the religious part of it lives on, but then they die right afterwards. There's 3 days later, they have a 3-day hiatus where they think they're all this, and then they get taken out. So, yeah, yes.
Tracy said, but I'd say Catholic parishioners don't know this. Only the higher ups do. None of my Catholic friends know about this.
Yeah, I agree. That's what's going on. That's correct. Yep.
Like Mason.
Yep. And then by the way, like Mormonism, Masonry, they're all the same. All these different people that have delusions and deception always kind of lead you on to a place where later on, when you're already knee deep or neck deep into their belief system and they know about you and your family, then they go, oh, by the way. You're like, what? I remember a Mason one time telling me, he's a 30, whatever it is, degree Mason, saying, he made this comment, I didn't make this up. This is what he said, this is what a live living person said to me. Not just in a book. He said to me that, did you know that Satan is the underbelly of God? What? He said, like they're the same person. Okay, say what? And he goes, yeah, when he's good, he's Jesus. And when he's bad, he's Satan. Okay, define what you mean. I think I know what you mean, but you said something there. Explain further. He said when you see good things being done in the Bible, he's acting as that side of the coin. He's acting as Jesus, the God of love. Then when he flips it, he's the God of wrath. He's now acting as Satan. Satan and Jesus are the same. And I'm like, say what? This guy's out there to lunch. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude. I'm out. See ya. Bye. So that's crazy. Now, that's just what they believe. I know but that's what he believes. And he said he got that from other people in that sense. I'm like, okay, interesting. But I was like, I'm out of this. So anyway, but the process of thought is that people don't know that when they first join. There's no way they know that. They just join because they think it's a fraternity of brothers to do nice things.
Mercy, and they don't see, they see the Jesus would be mercy, but Satan would be the judgment. They don't see that the judgment and mercy are in the one.
To me, these cults or isms or fraternities, organizations or institutions are the type of what the Q&A was about with the leprosy / the bacterial internal darkness that exudes itself with that mold and mildew and fungus that it really is. That festering inside of you is a deceptive aspect of hypocrisy within your mind and heart, because outwardly you're doing these niceties and good things to mankind's viewpoint. You think that inwardly that makes it okay. And God's saying, don't you understand? You call that nice and good what you're doing for burn victims and this and that and the other, but internally your disposition is hypocrisy. It's deceptive. And it's going to, how I see you is a person with a bacterial darkness inside who's manifesting it. You think you're good. I see white, green, and red, and dark, and black, which is the embodiment of the colors of Satan himself working in your life to deceive you, as he will in the future, without you even knowing it, like he does in the future. There's no difference. He deceives you here, and you're like, what happened? He does the same thing there. You're going to have no idea what's going to happen. People think, I'm going to know. No, you're not. You're not going to know until it's too late.
Wasn't it interesting? Red and green are the colors of Christmas, and of course Santa.
He's red and white. Yeah.
Satan.
I know. Yes, I know it's true. Yep.
First of all, Todd said Mormons, and then Lainey said, look at the Catholic Church today with all of the beauty, but ruining young children with their porn and molestation, etc.
Yeah, you want to see a Mormon's eyes get big, comes to your door? Do this one time. When they come to your door next time, have a short conversation with them and just say hello, and they're blah, 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 blah. Say, can I ask you one question? And I want to ask the young guy, the one who's talking, is usually the young, underling, right? And ask him just 2 things. Say, I want to ask you 2 questions. You have a prophet named Bruce R. McConkie, and he says, as man is, God once was, and as God is, man may become. And I understand you can't deny a prophet. That is what he said, correct? And they'll say, yes. So you're basically telling me that God was a man who became God, which means he had parents, but they're not God. Sounds odd, but I'll shelf that for a second. Then you actually say to me, that Elohim, you're teaching that in your understanding, is that correct, in your belief system, that Elohim had physical sexual intercourse with the Virgin Mary. Is that correct? He came down and physically had sexual intercourse with the Virgin Mary. Yes or no? And they'll say yes. They don't talk about those things until later on. And the big head guy will get freaked out. The young guy goes like this, like, what? I'm like, don't look at me, brother. Look at that guy right there. He's the one who's going to tell, you can't lie, tell the truth. Is that what you teach or not? He goes, you're not supposed to lie, right? And he goes, yeah, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, well, I've already freaked him out though, right? You want to see a funny exchange? It's kind of humorous a little bit to me because I think it's just playing with Satan's deception on their heads. And I go, really, guys? How can you be God if you have parents? Number one. Number two, are you serious about the sexual intercourse thing being physical? You really think that? Really? Really? You guys are sick. So anyways, yes.
Todd said, Preston, is that who you were referring to earlier?
I'm not sure what you were referring to earlier. I was referring to any kind of occultism. It's Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Freemasonry. Any of them have a delusion. I'm referring to all those people. They have a delusion, deceptive mindset when they lead you on and later on tell you. All those do that. Masons, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't tell you till later. Seventh-day Adventists, similar, not the same exact. They're not the same exact thing. There's two different versions of Seventh-day Adventist. There's the good version and the wackadoodle version. So the wackadoodle version will say anybody who's not them is also the mark of the beast worshiping on Sunday. And there's the version that says we're not that far off the reservation. We just don't believe that Sunday's the day. We think Saturday's the day. So there's two versions of Seventh-day Adventist. There's the wackadoodle version, I call it, that judges and condemns and looks south on all of us as being the mark of the beast. They think Sunday worship is that. So, but they don't really understand the depth of all that is. Ellen G. White's lies. So they have Seventh-day Adventists are a little bit like that. More Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Freemasons. Mormons and Freemasons have a lot of similarities, by the way. If you tell their secrets, they have the same code from which they judge you by. They say